welcome. This is the Kelly's Astrology podcast, where you can find insight, guidance, and understanding through astrology. I'm Kelly, and I'll be your host. Hey there, everyone, and welcome to this week's show. We have a new moon in Cancer coming up on Wednesday, June 25th. So that's going to be the main focus of today's show. There's a lot of different features to that new moon in terms of the energy and the aspects that it is involved with. So I'm going to talk about that. I will also briefly mention a special event called the Jupiter Cazimi, which is happening the day before the new moon. And so I'm going to mention a little bit about that in today's show as well. Before we dive into all of the new moon in Cancer themes and signatures, I want to let you know about my next webinar, which is all about the longer transit of Jupiter in Cancer. I'm going to be talking about how to nourish and thrive with Jupiter in Cancer. I'll be sharing tips and techniques as well as examples to help you make the most of this protective and supportive transit. My Jupiter in Cancer webinar is coming up on June 28th. If you can't make the live event, you will still get access to the recordings and the slides. So if you'd like to join us, pop over to kellysastrology.com to register. All right, so let's dive into this upcoming new moon in Cancer. So let's get the details out of the way. It is Wednesday, June 25th, and the new moon will be at 4 degrees of Cancer. And it is Wednesday, June 25th in most locations. So first, let's talk a little bit about the new moon itself. So the new moon itself is just a few days after the solstice. So it's on June 20th or 21st, depending on where you are, that the sun moves into Cancer, which creates the solstice, which is an important turning point in the yearly calendar. And just a few days later, we have this new moon in Cancer. The new moon in Cancer is also taking place in a sign that Jupiter has just moved into. So there's a few different things going on here, almost like a collection of themes about resetting and refocusing based on the new moon happening in a sign that Jupiter has just entered. And so it's a little bit as though this new moon is maybe pulling in a little bit of that Jupiter in Cancer focus in new ways. So you might be expanding your intentions into new areas. You might just be resetting in a bigger way than you typically do for a new moon. So this new moon has a sense of being a little special or significant because of some of these other things around it. So this new moon in Cancer, of course, is going to be a gorgeous new moon to help you with nurturing, with caring for yourself and for your loved ones, and also for this idea of caring for your home, for the place that you live. And that might include your physical home, the apartment or the house that you actually live in. It might include the natural environment around you, and it might even be extended out to this idea of caring or nurturing for the earth itself. So there's some different levels or layers, how far do you want to take this caring for your home piece, which is definitely a part of the new moon in Cancer. So nurturing and caretaking will be important themes. And given that we've got this new moon in Cancer and Jupiter has just begun a 12-month-long transit through Cancer, this new moon in some ways activates this unique mix of both short-term beginnings, like every new moon is about intentions for the next 4 weeks, but it can also activate some of these bigger beginnings or help you attune to awareness around growth that is coming in based on the longer 12-month Jupiter in Cancer transit. So Jupiter coming into Cancer is the beginning of a longer trend that invites you into a more expansive and healing point of view, especially around the topics of the Cancer house in your personal birth chart. That's an area of your chart in life where you're thinking about upgrades or improvements. And that's to do with the longer trend of Jupiter in Cancer. But because the new moon is in Cancer, it's helping activate those longer Jupiter in Cancer themes. And so this can be a time of growing awareness around the feelings, the cravings, or even just, oh yeah, that is a need of mine, like identifying needs that truly need your attention. And not just for the next 4 weeks to do with the new moon in Cancer, but actually for the next 12 months, because that's how long you'll have Jupiter in Cancer supporting you. So this new moon is in Cancer, which is the sign of the moon. And given that the moon is the ruler of the new moon in Cancer, we get this kind of repeating loop of the new moon is in Cancer, that's ruled by the moon. Where is the moon? The moon is in Cancer. So we've just got it's a really strong lunar signature, the new moon in Cancer. And that's the case every year. Every year we have this new moon in Cancer. It's like super lunar themes. And so what are lunar themes? One of the things that I really think about when I think about lunar living, if you like, is this awareness that life is in a constant state of ebb and flow. And when we're tapping into themes of the moon, which are really strongly activated under the Cancer new moon, we do get a bit of a reminder that we can't be constantly productive, that being consistent from the point of view of same thing every day, every week, every month with no end in sight doesn't actually work as well as we think. That's actually a solar style of living. That repetition or steadiness of day in, day out being same, that's the way the sun works. But we know the moon works differently. The lunar energy is reminding us that we're aligned with periods of activity that are balanced by periods of rest and retreat, because that is what we see from the moon. When we watch the moon day to day over the course of a month, we see the moon bright and big, hidden and vanished, and shifting between these two visible states, if you like. So with this idea of the new moon in Cancer really activating these lunar themes, it may be that you're taking some wisdom of the moon forward from this new moon in Cancer, reminding you that in the weeks and months ahead, you might want to modify your schedule to allow for this more fluctuating quality of motivation and drive, so that you are aware that there are periods where you feel full of vitality and really driven and you want to get a lot done, and that a week later or 2 weeks later, you may want a quieter, more fallow, more restful period, and that's kind of a cycle that you may want to draw on more. Given that the ruler of this new moon is the moon, another important lunar theme is that to do with food and nourishment. We talk about nourishment and nurturing for Cancer and the moon. Part of what we're really explicitly referencing there is food, like the literal substances that we take in to nourish and fuel our body. And so themes like food, food supply, access to food, agriculture and farming, as well as both environmental and security matters relating to food and food access. These are themes that are likely to be highlighted by this new moon in Cancer. So expect there to be some conversation about food access, maybe in your local area or community, but also expect to see a lot of conversation about food, about access to essential resources coming up in news topics and global events at this time as well, whether that's to do with environmental matters or transport and logistic matters specific to food distribution. These are the things that become really emphasized when we talk about the moon being highlighted and the moon having a connection to food. So some of this might inspire you at a personal level of connecting with wisdom that helps you with new rhythms around food preparation, and even just about nourishing yourself through food and maybe whole foods for you personally at a daily, weekly level. And then some of you might be, taking it to a different perspective, which is attuning to or exploring how to support improved access to food and essential nourishment for those in your wider community, maybe your country, or even the global issues around food supply and food production, food shortages, all of those pieces. When we get the topic of food activated, it's about, where is it going? Where is it not going? Who has what they need? Who has more than what they need? And most importantly, who doesn't have what they need? And so all of these themes around food and access to quality food are likely to be coming up, big themes around this new moon in Cancer. So, a technical piece around the ruler of the new moon in Cancer, it is the moon. And if we look at the moon through that lens, it is cazimi or conjunct the sun at the time of the new moon, of course, because the definition of a new moon is a conjunction by the sun and moon. And for 11 of the new moons we have a year, or 12 of the new moons we have a year, because we technically have 13, the ruler of the new moon is not the moon. So it's another planet in some other place or condition or aspect. But for the Cancer new moon, the ruler of the new moon is the moon, and that moon is conjunct the sun or cazimi. And so that adds an extra theme into this new moon. When the planet ruling the new moon is cazimi or conjunct the sun, we get this theme of access to divine knowledge. The sun is the source of ancient wisdom. And so the moon, the ruler of the new moon, conjunct the sun, it's really talking about old knowledge, whether it's like ancient wisdom. There's a deeply feminine theme because this is such a lunar energy, which of course is associated with the feminine and with the goddess. The ruler of the new moon being cazimi also highlights this idea of events taking place in private. And so with this cazimi quality for this new moon, we've got this idea of spending time in places that are sacred or that have that sanctuary quality. You might be drawn to these sort of sacred ritualistic places for devotional work, especially if you're interested in rituals or practices that might relate to the goddess, to the feminine deities, to wisdom through that goddess lineage, if you like. For some of us, that's going to be really explicit, like devotional temples or sacred places. For some of us, that will be feeling as though being in nature is a sacred temple kind of space. For some of us, it might be reconnecting with a very sacred kind of hearth space energy of the kitchen and food preparation. So when we talk about the sacred energy, sometimes it's explicit in that more spiritual temple type way, and other times it's more finding that sacred in those everyday settings, because this is the moon that we're talking about. Because the ruler of the new moon is in this cazimi state, it's a clue that some of the beginnings of this new moon that you might be experiencing are actually taking place in private, or that they're things that are shifting maybe within you or in your very immediate circles that you might want to keep to yourself for now. It's kind of like intimate, private, even though it's very potent and got those themes of renewal. Okay, so there's a lot about the new moon there. Maybe one extra piece just to add in. Of course, Jupiter is very close to the new moon. It's the closest aspecting planet. And so that does provide a bit of a buffering, supportive quality. One of the themes I'm exploring for Jupiter in Cancer is this idea of care or protection that is sustainable and endurable. So that idea of the longevity, the legacy for generations to come. And so there's threads of that are kind of baked into this new moon as well. We're going to talk a little bit more about Jupiter towards the end of the podcast. I want to mention Saturn and Neptune at this point, and these are the more potentially problematic elements around this new moon in Cancer. So technically speaking, the new moon at 4 degrees of Cancer is separating from a square to both Neptune and Saturn, who are in Aries. At the time of the new moon, Neptune is at 2 Aries and Saturn is at 1 Aries. And so at that first look, that can show that this new moon might help you slowly begin to move forward from recent challenges or difficulties. Maybe you're just finding your way through a period of like restriction, or you're just figuring out how to navigate some disappointment or loss. So that's one of the possibilities here. When we get into it a little bit more, we can see that the square to Saturn from this new moon is still kind of tight. The new moon's at 4 degrees and Saturn's at 1 degree. And so it's right at that 3-degree marker that ancient astrologers identified as being a particularly potent orb. So anything within 3 degrees is a very potent type of aspect orb. So while technically this new moon is separating from Saturn, it's possible that we've still got a lot of Saturnian energy baked in to this new moon. Now, that can bring some clarity about the limits that do exist. Like, oh, I wasn't aware that that boundary was there or that that was as firm as I thought it was. And we're going to see that quite clearly. It may be that we're having to acknowledge or navigate limits or rules and regulations that we might disagree with or that we find particularly restrictive. So we're really kind of exploring that edge of Saturn here. And because Saturn is making this sort of tight aspect to the new moon, it might actually reveal the limits, themes of restraint, but also this idea of the bounds of control. And there may be some resistance or reaction to that because we know that Saturn right now is in Aries, which is the fall placement for Saturn. And we have this sense of like disintegrating energy around Saturn and Saturnian things. So Saturnian things can be authority figures, leaders. It can be, organizations with a lot of power or influence. So government is something that's often associated with Saturn and Saturnian energy. And so we can be seeing this idea of the disintegration of what would normally be stability or security or safety from Saturnian figures. And rather, we're getting these expressions of some people in positions of power maybe operating from fear or desire to control. And then we're seeing some of the overreach or instability that springs from that. So Saturn in Aries is a very complex placement. And I know we haven't got into that a lot on the podcast yet. Some of you who are inside my membership will have a sense of this from the early conversations we've started to have there. But this new moon, because it's squaring Saturn, it's bringing some of the problematic energies of this Saturn in Aries forward. And so if you're dealing with, a situation where there's a person or an organization in a position of power that you're having to negotiate with and it's rubbing you up the wrong way or it's causing you some stress or pressure, that can be part of this new moon square Saturn in Aries. Now, we don't just have the Saturn from Aries because Saturn and Neptune are so close to each other right now. We also have this square from Neptune. And so the square from the new moon to Neptune, that's a tighter orb, only 2 degrees, because Neptune's at 2 Aries, the new moon's at 4 Cancer. And so technically speaking, again, it is separating, but it's still really close. And Neptune's energy is very different from Saturn. Neptune's influence on this new moon can bring some confusion. It can bring a lack of clarity or this quality of uncertainty. Neptune can also highlight these outpourings of emotion, especially for suffering, especially suffering that might feel senseless or very callous. So that idea of this groundswell of emotion for those that are in pain or those that are really suffering and struggling. Now, that can actually heighten compassion and it can bring a lot of strong feelings to the surface. The new moon is in a water sign, which we know has a connection to feelings and emotions. And now we've got Neptune's sensitivity in the mix. So expect to be full of feelings. When we do have Neptune involved, it can be tricky to sort fact from fiction. We know we have the planet of illusion and fantasy in the mix. So that can be a time where we're worried about worst case scenarios, where we aren't always like grounded in the facts or the reality. And so this is a really interesting contradictory piece with Saturn bringing a lot of reality and restriction and Neptune kind of like, what's happening? Is this real? Is this not real? So it's going to be quite complex. There's a lot of nuance here. With Neptune in the mix, it's possible that we can have feelings of overwhelm and certainly that quality of uncertainty. And so that can feel a bit messy. You might be in a situation in your life, personally, it could be in a relationship, around career, a home or family situation where it just seems very messy or very unclear for a period of time, maybe just 24, 48 hours, but it might feel a little all-consuming as you're going through it. And of course, lots of emotion, lots of feelings, lots of big feelings. And so we're going to all need some space to process our reactions to some of the Saturn pieces and the feelings that are coming up with Neptune in the mix. So while this new moon in Cancer, certainly at first glance, has lots of these nourishing themes to it, it also has a lot of complexity and it might bring a turning point around shared or collective events and experiences, given that the new moon is still tying into and drawing forward a lot of these threads from Saturn and Neptune in Aries. So that's a lot about the new moon in Cancer and its sort of variations of expression. To briefly pop back to the Cazimi theme, I did want to mention that Jupiter is making its annual conjunction with the Sun, and that places Jupiter in the Cazimi condition. And that happens on June 24th. Unless you're in Australia, it'll be June 25th. So the Sun and Jupiter come together in their own kind of renewal, rebirth place. That is at 3 Cancer on June 24th. And then we have the new moon in Cancer at 4 Cancer the next day. So it's interesting to me that those two events, the rebirth of Jupiter and then the new moon in Cancer, taking place in the same zodiac sign, just 24 hours apart. And there's a few themes here. So first up, let's touch on those Cazimi threads of, Jupiter is Cazimi. It is deeply invisible. It is operating in secret. It is operating out of sight. So that idea of what's going on behind the scenes. Jupiter is undergoing a type of renewal or rebirth as it is purified by its proximity to the Sun. And in some ways, I think this is going to be a great Cazimi for Jupiter because it is washing away the past 12-month cycle, which had to do with Jupiter and Gemini, and it's kind of being updated for its, mission or instructions for the next 12 months with Jupiter in Cancer. And technically speaking, Jupiter in Cancer is a better place than Jupiter in Gemini. We're going from the place of detriment to the place of exaltation for Jupiter. And so, most astrologers are really looking forward to this because there's a lot of good stuff that can come out of it. So we've got this repetition of theme about Jupiter entering a new sign and then immediately going through its renewal Cazimi conjunction. And so it's almost as though the cosmos is saying there's a really fresh approach to Jupiter that's coming through on a couple of levels. So Jupiter Cazimi is attuning to that wisdom and divine guidance of the Sun as if Jupiter is getting its, instructions for the next 12 months. Now, Jupiter is already inspired by some of its highest ideals about justice, about mercy, about sustainability, about sharing, wealth and resources, about protection and safety for all. And that's based on Jupiter being exalted in Cancer, which is the idea of how do we get the plenty that exists to all who need it. And so Jupiter already has that based on its sign placement. And now through its Cazimi with the Sun, it's as if Jupiter is really getting clarity on how to proceed with its intentions and goals over the next 12 months. Now, for each of us personally, the topics of the Cancer part of our birth chart are undergoing this kind of major renovation, the upgrade, the renewal, the improvement. And the seeds of that are being planted this week. You may not get all the upgrades finished this week, but between the Jupiter Cazimi in Cancer on June 24th and the new moon in Cancer on June 25th, that Cancer part of your chart is totally being reset and reconstructed. The 12-year cycle of, since Jupiter was last in this part of your chart. So that's taking you all the way back to the second half of 2013, the first half of 2014. Whatever you chose at that point, you are now reassessing and resetting. You are upgrading the choices that you made in that time frame to better fit current circumstances. And really, if you do know your birth chart, think about the topics of the Cancer part of your chart. So another piece to keep in mind with Jupiter being Cazimi, so having that Cazimi conjunction is great, but it does tell us that Jupiter is not visible for a period of time. And with the ruler of the new moon being the moon, also being Cazimi and hidden, we've got this kind of behind closed doors or happening in secret vibe. Now, the moon will become visible again within about 24 hours after the new moon itself, but it's going to take Jupiter a couple of weeks to become visible again. So using the standard 15-degree visibility marker, Jupiter won't be seen in the sky until about mid-July. And at that point in time, Jupiter is going to become an evening star. Beg your pardon, morning star. I'm getting confused with morning and evening here. Jupiter will be rising before the Sun. So it's around mid-July when the Sun and Jupiter are about 15 degrees apart. Jupiter will be in early Cancer. The Sun will be in late Cancer. So Jupiter will be coming up over the horizon just before sunrise. So if you're up early before sunrise, you'll be able to see Jupiter in the eastern sky starting about mid-July. And that return to visibility of Jupiter is when we start to kind of want to share or move forward with in a more outward way the beginnings and the seeds that are planted from this Jupiter cazimi in this last week of June. I know that's a little bit of technical info, but hopefully I've explained it enough that we're kind of seeing the link between late June and mid-July in terms of starting to show the potential of Jupiter in Cancer. So what this is telling us is that the dreams or the longings that you become clear of in late June, or any seeds that you're planting now, choices that you make, initiations that you are implementing, those things from late June are kind of going to be germinating and, growing in secret, growing in the dark for now. But you can be sure that that idea of the birth of the dream, or that idea of the conception, like the meeting or the initial coming together, that has taken place. That's what's going on in this last week of June. And that means that the initiation, if you like, or the beginnings that happen in this last week of June, they are tying, just like, when the sperm fertilizes the egg, or when the seed is planted in the ground, there's, maybe the seed in the ground is a little bit better visually. You don't see anything above ground for a couple of weeks. The seed is putting its roots down first. That's what's going on now. And these initial connections have been formed. And so the weeks and months to come, second half of 2025, first half of 2026, that's when we see the growth and the flourishing of what has begun in late June. So this last week of June brings these new moons, with the new moon in Cancer, I should say, it's one new moon, with the ruler cazimi and then Jupiter cazimi, and that really speak of this like secret conception or hidden beginning. And we've got lots of time for those things to bear fruit. So kind of just adjusting your pacing may be important. So I would love to know if you are really connecting into and aware of these ideas, the dreams, the longings that might be taking root inside of you now. You can let me know in the comments below. Some of you, given the secret quality of the cazimi energy, might prefer to keep the thing itself private, but maybe you just want to let us know that yes, you feel it and you're kind of letting it germinate in the darkness for now, which can be a great place for that early beginning energy. So there's a lot more to this new moon in Cancer in this last week of June than meets the eye. If you do have any other questions, comments, or clarifications about today's show, let me know in the comments below. Thank you again for joining me. I so appreciate for you being here along this podcasting journey of mine. Until next time, take care.